There are so many entertaining and revealing aspects of what is now this complete spectacle involving the question of whether Joe Biden is fit enough to run for president, whether Democratic Party elites believe that he is capable of defeating Donald Trump, which is really the only relevant metric that they have. Now, as of course all of you know, until the presidential debate, where Joe Biden looked to everybody like a declining and crippled dementia patient, it was essentially taboo to mention in any sector of liberal media the fact that Biden was very visibly and obviously undergoing severe cognitive decline. In fact, we've shown you many times the vicious attacks that were launched against people, the accusations that were made against them for anyone trying to raise these concerns, even though polling data for years have shown that Americans themselves not only see it, but are extremely worried about it. It was still unmentionable in the liberal sectors of corporate media, where the only recognizable and legitimate and accepted goal, the overarching mission, is to do everything possible to ensure that Joe Biden wins the election and Trump loses it. And so any mention of this thing that everyone could see for themselves was not only taboo, but essentially resulted in all sorts of recriminations against anyone who did so. And we've shown you many times the history of this issue, namely that the very first people to raise the issue of Joe Biden's cognitive decline were not Trump supporters in 2023 or Bernie Sanders supporters in 2020. It was actually Democratic Party insiders in 2018 and 2019 who were petrified that Biden would get the nomination simply because of name recognition, and then proceed to lose the election to Trump because they knew he was in cognitive decline. And they were saying that openly as a way to convince Democratic voters not to vote for Biden. And it was only once Democratic Party voters, as usual, ignored these pundits and other people in the media and instead decided to elect Joe Biden did it suddenly become, that minute, unacceptable any longer to question Joe Biden's cognitive appearance. But if you go back and look at the debates, the Democratic Party debates in 2020, people like Cory Booker and Julian Castro, other candidates on the stage, were openly mocking Joe Biden for being too old, for having memory issues, for not being able to function, and Democratic insiders and media insiders were doing the same. And so that was 2019. And you can just already look at the impaired Joe Biden in 2020 and compare him to the Joe Biden of this year to see how radical and abrupt this decline has worsened, to the point where not even the media could deny it any longer as a result of that debate. Now, just to give you a little bit of a sense for how abrupt was this complete shift in Democratic Party narrative and media narrative, where all of them were united, literally up until the day of that debate, in insisting that there was nothing wrong with Joe Biden, that he was as vigorous as ever, that anybody who suggested otherwise was a right-wing liar and a perpetrator of fake news. And they weren't doing that a year ago or 2 years ago, although they were, but they were also doing it weeks before the debate itself. We've shown you several times the video of Joe Scarborough a week before the Democratic Party debate, or 2 weeks, when the Wall Street Journal published an article, a deeply reported article, saying that people close to Biden have seen over and over that he is incapable of staying connected and focused, that he often has no idea where he is or what's being said. And Joe Scarborough came out and angrily attacked the Wall Street Journal, as did the Biden White House and pretty much everybody else, claiming it was a partisan hit piece. And Joe Scarborough said that he can assure the nation, as somebody who has spent a lot of time with Joe Biden recently, that he is more vigorous and more mentally agile than ever before. But here is a similar video also on MSNBC, where former Biden White House press secretary, that's still really her role, she just does it for MSNBC, Jen Psaki, had onto her show Congressman Jamie Raskin, the Democrat from Maryland. This was June 16th, just 3 weeks ago. And you can listen to what they say about people raising questions about Biden's mental capacity.
This all comes in a week where there was some New York Post report, inaccurate, false reporting that suggested that President Biden was kind of stalling, where he was paused, he was looking the other way. I feel like there's a double standard. I mean, do you feel like there's a double standard out there and how people are looking at their ages?
They can't mess with him on substance, so they go after what they see as his Achilles heel, which is his age. And of course, a lot of people see his age as, something that helps to explain some of his wisdom and some of his compassion. The kind of compassion you see not just within his family, but outside of it. That compassion for people in his family, which is real and authentic, becomes solidarity for everybody in the country who's struggling, as well as for people around the world.
That was 3 weeks ago, where the prevailing narrative among Democratic Party leaders and liberal media elites was that not only is Joe Biden not suffering as a result of his age, he's prospering because of it. It's what gives him his wisdom, the compassion for which he's so well known, the love and empathy that he exudes. Part of that is because of his age. We're lucky to have somebody as old as Joe Biden. We were being told just 3 weeks ago. And then the debate happened, and I believe it will go down in history as one of the greatest media scandals ever, that it became too evident, too visible, too viscerally clear for these media figures to hide any longer what the public had long been seeing, what all sorts of people have long been saying, which is that Joe Biden is an obvious and serious cognitive decline. But because he was the only nominee they had against Donald Trump, they wanted to do everything possible, the media did, to lie to the public, to conceal Biden's health in order to ensure that they dragged him over the finish line. And it's by far not the first time they've lied to try and defeat Donald Trump. They obviously did it in 2016 by inventing this insane, deranged conspiracy theory about Russiagate. They did it in 2020 when they presented these ex-intelligence officials to lie and claim the Hunter Biden laptop and all reporting based on it was unreliable and shouldn't be listened to because it wasn't authentic, but rather Russian disinformation. So it's not a surprise that the media is willing to lie consciously and deliberately and repeatedly and in unity to get Joe Biden and Democrats over the finish line. They've proven that over the last two elections, just like they've proven in the Democratic Party in their primaries that they don't care in the slightest about democracy at all. None of this is new, but this is such a severe example of it that I think even people who didn't want to see it are now being forced to. It is hard to overstate how unified is the attempt now to drive Joe Biden out of this race on the part of Democratic Party elites and their media allies, the same people insisting that there was nothing wrong with Joe Biden just 3 weeks ago. It is a virtual requirement now for good standing in liberal politics and Democratic Party politics to do everything possible to try to drive Joe Biden out of the race against his will, to just badger him and coerce him and threaten him with funding and with punishments and leaks until they just force him out of the race, the Democratic Party nominee who was democratically chosen. And it is equally clear that Joe Biden has no intention of leaving. He does not want to leave. He says it every day. I do not intend to leave. I'm not going anywhere. And so they're not trying to persuade him. They're trying to badger him and coerce him out of the race. Here from the New York Times on July 2nd, the DNC member pitches a process to replace Biden as a nominee in a memo to party chair. And this is what they've been doing. These Democratic elites, these liberal elites have been inventing these fantasies about how they're going to create a process to choose Joe Biden's replacement once he's out of the race, even though he keeps saying, I'm not leaving the race. Quote, the process outlined by James Zogby starts with an unlikely prospect, quote, President Biden announcing that he would drop out of the race. I mean, this is the fairy tale in which these people are living. Every pundit every day talks about how to choose Joe Biden's replacement, even though he keeps saying, I don't want to leave, I don't intend to leave, you can't make me leave, and I'm not going anywhere. This is my favorite one, the favorite fantasy that liberal elites are creating for the New Republic on July 8th, which is today. Quote, Democrats plot a celebrity-filled game plan to replace Joe Biden. Quote, two well-connected Democrats are circulating a plan on how to replace Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee. They would hold a, quote, blitz primary, which would include candidate forums every week to engage voters, hosted by celebrities such as Michelle Obama, Oprah, and Taylor Swift, among others. The eventual nominee would be chosen by delegates using ranked choice voting before the convention begins on August 19th. Now, the Democratic Party over the last decade has been remarkably in lockstep, remarkably unified. You almost never hear any dissent from within the Democratic Party. And yet, over the past week, slowly, Democratic House members and even a couple of senators are now emerging to make clear that they think Joe Biden should leave the race, just constantly applying the pressure more and more on him every single day. Here is one of those House members who exerts immense power, but is very little known by the public. His name is Adam Smith. He's a longtime congressman from the state of Washington. He represents the district where Boeing is based. He gets massive amounts of donations from Boeing and the arms industry. And he is either, depending on whether the Democrats are in charge of the House or not, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee or the minority member. He is a war hawk and a warmonger, constantly supporting, as you would expect the representative from Boeing to be, massive military expenditures and endless war. He's one of those guys, just operates in the dark behind the scenes, but is a crucial player in Democratic Party leadership of the House. He went on CNN today, and here's what he had to say about Joe Biden. There you see actually the graphic on the screen. Breaking news, Congressman Adam Smith calls on Biden to drop out of the presidential race.
Well, we got a good message. The president has shown he is not capable of delivering that message in an effective way.
Just because, I shouldn't say just, because that 90-minute debate was a lot. But is this based entirely on that event? No.
No. There was concerns leading up to it in the terms of the president's ability to deliver a message, and it hasn't gotten better since the debate. The overall...
Now, I could spend the whole night just showing you mainstream Democratic outlets and big Democratic Party donors coming out more and more saying that they think Biden must withdraw. Here is the Economist on July 4th, so over the weekend, why Biden must withdraw. The president and his party portray themselves as the saviors of democracy. Their actions say otherwise. It is amazing how all of these outlets have almost reflexively decided that whatever they believe is the pro-democracy position. So here you have the Economist demanding that despite being chosen by voters to represent the Democratic Party and be their presidential nominee, that Joe Biden be forced out of the race against his will. The ultimate anti-democratic position that we, the elite, should determine who the Democratic Party nominee should be, not the voters in their elections. And yet they depict their view that Biden must leave as being the pro-democracy view, or that Biden's decision to say is somehow threatening democracy. I suppose that's because what they do is they equate their views necessarily and inherently with defense of democracy, no matter what it is, and any opposition to their views as inherently being anti-democracy, just like they believe that their views define truth and any opposition to or dissent from their views constitutes, quote, disinformation. They've recreated language in such a radical way that you really have to pay attention to how they do it. And that is what they believe. They believe that the only way that American democracy can be saved is if the will of the American voters are thwarted and Joe Biden is not permitted to run as the Democratic nominee, and that even though the majority of voters have said that they support Trump and want him to be reelected, or at least a plurality in every poll pretty much, they believe that democracy can only be saved by ensuring that Trump does not get elected. Here is Matt Yglesias, who is deservedly known as one of the most partisan Democratic loyalists in all of media. And he has spent months, if not years, mocking viciously the idea that Joe Biden is not cognitively capable to be the president, that he should step down and they should choose another candidate. And now, all of a sudden, he looks around him and he sees how isolated he is, that every single one of the other liberal pundits like him in his space, in his sphere, are saying the exact opposite of what he's saying. Namely, they're now all saying, we want Biden gone from the race. They all joined hands and switched views. And so, obviously, people like Matt Yglesias have no ability to stand alone from the herd. They're herd animals. I think this is more than anything the thing that has corrupted journalism. These people are petrified to even take one tiny little step out of line from what the prevailing media narrative is. And as a result, here's Matt Yglesias today with his tweet promoting an article he wrote, quote, "In case you missed it, why I sincerely expected Biden to prove the doubters wrong at the debate, why it was wrong, and why it's so much more than, quote, one bad night," or whatever they're saying. Matt Yglesias has never deviated from the White House party line. He, at best, makes very polite suggestions for how they could strengthen their message, things like that. But it is remarkable to watch all these people read from the same script for months and even years. And then on the same day, with the same signaling, they all just switch. And now they're required, they're obligated. 3 weeks ago, they were required to say that Joe Biden was cognitively vigorous and capable. And then the debate happened, and now they're all required to read from the opposite script, and they all obediently do so. I still remember during Russiagate, this is one of the things that influenced me most in 2016, 2017, when I was still at The Intercept and I began expressing very serious skepticism about the Russiagate conspiracy theory, which is my first breach with the left, when I was getting emails and DMs from people inside major media corporations who were telling me, "Oh, I'm so glad you're out there expressing these doubts, demanding this evidence." And obviously the subtext of it was, I share those doubts, but I can't do it myself. And on the one hand, you can call them cowards, and maybe they do deserve that. But on the other hand, it's the truth that the media has become extremely tyrannical and despotic. They don't tolerate any dissent. And unless you're like a major media figure with a very secure platform, any attempt to just stick your head up just a little bit, to just kind of mildly question the prevailing narrative of corporate media, will mean that you will get mauled on liberal Twitter, and everyone will see it, all your colleagues, your bosses, your future employers. It will mean that you become unliked among the audience of CNN or NBC or the readership of the New York Times or the Washington Post or any of these 1,000 identical liberal media outlets, and they won't offend their readers. And so if you do that, you become basically the black sheep of that media corporation. It is enforced herd behavior. And I really believe there is nothing worse for journalism and nothing worse for being a pundit or an analyst or a commentator than being petrified to take one step away from the herd. That is the worst. Conformism is the worst quality to have in journalism. And yet it is what drives almost all of the corporate media, which is what explains how they can go from one vigorously believed, definitively enforced narrative one day to the exact opposite one the next, and have each be equally obligatory and have basically everybody willing to read from one script one day and then the exact opposite script from the next with barely any recognition or acknowledgement that they've done so. Now, the interesting part of this episode up until now is that Joe Biden and the people who control Joe Biden, and it's important to note those people, whoever controls Joe Biden, controls the power of the presidency, want very much to keep that power in their hands. This has always been why I've been skeptical about their ability to drive Joe Biden out of the race. Joe Biden was elected to the Senate when he was 29 years old in the early 1970s. Obviously, if you get elected to the Senate in your 20s, the first thing you're doing is thinking about how you're likely to be a president. You have your whole life to just plan that and to plot how you're going to do that and to figure out there's no other next step. And Joe Biden has run for the presidency 3 times. He ran in 1988, 16 years after he was first elected to the Senate. He actually was one of the favorites to win the Democratic Party nominee until he was forced out of the race due to chronic and blatant serial lying about his life, as well as multiple incidents of nepotism, or rather plagiarism. He then ran again in 2008 and ended up getting crushed, but that was when Barack Obama selected him to be the vice president. And then he ran again in 2020, secured the nomination, and finally won. He finally got a hold of this power and title that he's been seeking his entire life. You think that Joe Biden, having spent his entire life chasing this thing that he just wanted and finally got his hands on, is like, for the good of the country, just going to let it go and sacrifice his own self-interest and his own sensation of power and importance at the end of his life for some kind of broad, self-sacrificing, benevolent concern for some kind of social good? What has Joe Biden ever done in his lifetime that suggests that he's that kind of person? Absolutely nothing. In fact, it's so rare for anyone to do that I was thinking about this the other day. It happened a while ago, so I think a lot of people have forgotten, including myself. But when Edward Snowden first contacted me to talk to me about the archive that he had and wanted me to report on it, he obviously needed to contact me anonymously. He couldn't, in an open email, on an encrypted email, say, "Hi, I'm Edward Snowden with the NSA, and I'd like to hand you a top secret file." So he had to be very careful, and he used a pseudonym. And the pseudonym he chose was Cincinnatus. And the reason he chose that pseudonym is because Cincinnatus, though his story was something that really impressed Snowden. He had been a high-level official in Rome. He had been a popular figure. And once he was done, after a few years of power, he decided he wanted to retire and go back to his farm and wanted nothing to do with power or politics in Rome. And when there was a major war that Rome found itself in, including a civil war, they needed a leader who could unite all the factions in Rome. And he was the only person who had the popularity and standing to do that. And so they begged him and pleaded with him to go back to Rome and assume the power he had given up. And he finally reluctantly agreed to do that solely for the sake of Rome. But he said, the minute this war is over, the minute the peace is restored, I don't want any of this. I don't want any of this title, any of these powers. I'm going right back to my farm. And they said, okay, fine. Well, no one believed him. They thought, of course, he's going to come back and rule and then want to keep ruling. But he followed through on his word. The minute the peace was restored and order was restored, he left Rome. He gave up his titles. He went back into private life on his farm the way he had wanted. And Snowden was so impressed because this behavior is so rare that was the pseudonym he adopted, Snowden did, when he first began contacting me. And I say that just to underscore how incredibly rare it is for human beings in general to willingly give up power, but particularly for a politician whose entire adult life has been about nothing but the pursuit of power. Even if their brain is melting, the one part of their brain that will survive, kind of like cockroaches survive a nuclear holocaust, is the part of the brain that craves power. That is something Joe Biden will know he wants, no matter how dysfunctional his brain gets. It's so embedded in who he is. And as a result, no matter how many people come out and say that they're members of Congress, Democrats who demand that Joe Biden leave the race, no matter how many former enslaved media allies come out and say that, no matter how many big donors come out and say that, every single day, Joe Biden, or again, the people controlling Joe Biden, are making extremely clear that they are not going to do that. Now, that doesn't mean that at some point in the future, nothing could happen that could make Joe Biden change his mind. But at least for now, the language that he's using is so absolute, and even he's now attacking the power factions within the Democratic Party who are trying to drive him out of the race, something unthinkable to watch within Democratic Party politics. It is very clear that Biden does not want to leave the race, and that all of these efforts that are being escalated and intensified every day are designed to drive him out of the race, the sitting president, the elected nominee of his party, to drive him out of the race involuntarily, to force him out of the race through the consolidation of unified, unelected power in the hands of donors, media, and the political class. And it's particularly ironic that this is the faction, the Democratic Party, that has claimed for months, in fact for years, that only they believe in the values of democracy, that only they can safeguard democratic values, and yet so much of what they do in the way they run their primaries in 2016, where they cheated in 2020, where they conspired to drive everyone out of the race except for Bernie and Elizabeth Warren so that Biden got the entire vote, and then in 2024, where they basically prohibited any primary at all. These people are the most anti-democratic faction imaginable. And obviously, I'm not a fan of Joe Biden, to put that mildly, although I do somewhat like this new leaf that he's grown of constantly ranting and raving against the evils of the Democratic Party elite. But the actual real Joe Biden, obviously, is someone I'm not a fan of. And I don't think the country would do very well if he stayed in power for 4 more years. But the way that Democratic and liberal elites in media and finance and politics are trying to drive him out seems to have a whiff, not just of anti-democracy, but of kind of coup behavior that I think you should find very disturbing no matter what you think of Joe Biden. So he said multiple things today to make clear that he does not want to go out. Here is a statement that he posted to Twitter. When I say he, I'm obviously talking about the people in control of his account and his statements. Quote, he says, in the tweet, this morning I sent a letter to my fellow Democrats on Capitol Hill. In it, I shared my thoughts about this moment in our campaign. It's time to come together, move forward as a unified party, and defeat Donald Trump. And this is part of what the letter said. Quote, I have had extensive conversations with the leadership of the party, elected officials, rank and file members, and most importantly, Democratic voters over these past 10 days or so. I have heard the concerns that people have, their good faith fears and worries about what is at stake in this election. I am not blind to them. Believe me, I know better than anyone the responsibility and the burden of the nominee of our party carries. I carried it in 2022 when the fate of our nation was at stake. I also know these concerns come from a place of real respect for my lifetime in public service and my record as president, and I have been moved by the expressions of affection for me from so many who have known me well and supported me over the course of my public life. I've been grateful for the rock-solid, steadfast support from so many elected Democrats in Congress and all across the country, and have taken great strength from the resolve and determination I've seen from so many voters and grassroots supporters, even in the hardest of weeks. I can respond to all of this by saying clearly and unequivocally, I wouldn't be running if I did not absolutely believe I was the best person to beat Donald Trump in 2024. We had a Democratic nomination process, and the voters have spoken clearly and decisively. I received over 14 million votes, 87% of the votes cast across the entire nominating process. I have nearly 3,900 delegates, making me the presumptive nominee of our party by a wide margin. This was a process open to anyone who'd wanted to run. Now, that's a total lie, but let's leave that aside for the moment. Only 3 people chose to challenge me. One fared so badly that he left the primaries to run as an independent. That's RFK Jr. Another attacked me for being too old and was soundly defeated. That's Marianne Williamson. The voters of the Democratic Party have voted. They have chosen me to be the nominee of this party. Do we now just say this process doesn't matter? That the voters don't have a say? I decline to do that. I feel a deep obligation to the faith and trust the voters of the Democratic Party have placed in me to run this year. It was their decision to make. Not the press, not the pundits, not the big donors, not any selected group of individuals, no matter how well-intentioned. The voters, and the voters alone, decide the nominee of the Democratic Party. How can we stand for democracy in our nation if we ignore it in our own party? Yes, indeed, Joe. Very good question. How can Democrats stand for democracy if they do not even practice it in our own party? He concluded, quote, I cannot do that. I will not do that. Now, the really interesting dynamic here is that you have the Democratic Party elites, and every day that they come out and bash Joe Biden as being too mentally crippled or too inept or too senile or too slow or too adult to be the nominee of the Democratic Party, they actually are harming Joe Biden's chances, obviously. One of the big benefits of being the Democratic Party nominee is usually you have the entire media all day disseminating propaganda on your behalf. Instead, anyone who tunes into CNN or MSNBC or reads the New York Times or the Washington Post or all those outlets that usually defend Democrats are hearing nothing other than Joe Biden is too old. He's not up for the job. He's unfit to be president. He needs to leave. So they're all in on this strategy. How can they possibly go back after spending every day, day after day, and they're going to continue saying that Biden is unfit to be president because of his cognitive problems, that was not just a single bad night at a debate, but instead is a condition that impedes Joe Biden in significant ways. How can they continuously say that and now suddenly back off and say, you know what? Okay, Biden is staying. We now agree that he's perfectly fit to run for office. That can't be done. On the other hand, you have Joe Biden and the people around him who are clearly saying, we don't care what you think. There is no chance we are giving up this power. I'm sure they do believe that they're the best person to beat Donald Trump. After all, people counted out Joe Biden in the 2020 election. He got the nominee, and then he went on to defeat Donald Trump and was the certified winner of the campaign. So I'm sure Biden and the people around him genuinely believe that he's not only the best person to run, but also is entitled to it. And it kind of reminds me of the war in Ukraine, where at the very beginning, NATO defined victory in such a maximalist way. Namely, we demand the expulsion of every Russian troop from every inch of Ukrainian soil, including Crimea, something that was never going to happen. That made it impossible to find a resolution. There's no way out of that war because one side or the other will be too humiliated and can't accept that. And so it just went on forever. This seems to me very similar. How can every one of Joe Biden's most strident cheerleaders continuously say that he's cognitively incapable of being president and then allow him to stay in the race and somehow think that they can just get behind him and convince Americans to vote for him? Now, I should say that there are some people in the Democratic Party who are actually stalwart defenders of Joe Biden and are saying that they think he should be the nominee. Ironically, among the leaders of that group are people like AOC, who came out today and said, I don't think Biden should be driven from the race, and Bernie Sanders, who over the weekend said, look, this isn't a Grammy Award winning contest, so Biden can't run up the steps as fast as he used to. Who cares? That's the sort of thing that those people are saying. It's ironic that the left wing of the Democratic Party, the supposed rebels against the Democratic Party, have become the most devoted partisan loyalists, but most of the press and most of the Democratic Party are against Joe Biden. And the question is, how are they going to resolve that? Now, just to underscore the point, Joe Biden called in today to his favorite TV show, Morning Joe, which he watches every day for obvious reasons. Joe Scarborough and Nika Brzezinski and the people they invite on are Joe Biden's biggest, most unquestioning and devoted fans. Joe Scarborough was one of the people saying, trust me, I'm with Biden all the time. I talk to him all the time. He's more cognitively fit than ever. And so he called in today, and it's obviously the best platform for him to call into. Also, he doesn't have to appear on camera, so he doesn't look like he's having those confused moments. You can't see him, so his staff can be encouraging him to say anything or even writing out a script for him or pointing to what script he should read. But there were points when Joe Biden got obviously angry, just like he did in the debate. And this anger is actually a symptom of cognitive decline. I don't know if any of you have had that experience where you've had to visit grandparents or parents in nursing homes, and so many of the people there who are very sadly suffering from obvious cognitive disease, Alzheimer's or senility or various forms of dementia, usually they're not docile. They're actually quite aggressive, quite angry. Sometimes I've had incidents when I've visited nursing home that I've actually found kind of scary, like nightmare scenarios where these old men and women who seem like they shouldn't be moving at all are enraged. And Biden had a lot of those moments when he got just so angry during the debate, and he did the same when he called into Morning Joe today. And here was one segment of that interview where he not only got angry, but got angry in a way that I found very revealing. Listen to what he's ranting and raving against.
What would you say to those who are concerned by that answer?
It's not an option, and I've not lost. I haven't lost. I beat him last time. I'll beat him this time. And this is a guy who, look, we talk about debates. Look at his performance with debates. He lied over, Trump has 50 lies. Look, this is a guy who says 10% of the universe. I don't want to get into it. He's just a liar. And he hasn't done a damn thing since the debate. He's been riding around in a golf cart for 10 days or down in Mar-a-Lago talking with his wealthy friends. I'm not running because of these guys, Joe. I'm running because, and you know me well enough to know this from the very beginning, I ran because I never bought on in the trickle-down economic theory. I never bought into the notion that we have to walk away from the rest of the world and cave to Putin or anybody else. I've never believed any of that. And I'm confident that's where the American people are. So what I did was I went out and I wanted to make sure that there wasn't any slippage at all. And with the average voter, I don't care what the millionaires think. And by the way, 97% of all the people who contribute to us people make it under 200, contribute under $200. I think we have the largest contingent ever in history. I'm not positive of that, but I think that's true. And so I want their support, but that's not the reason I'm running. I'm not running about what they think and what they care about. And by the way, you don't see a whole hell of a lot of them flocking to Trump. You don't see a whole lot of CEOs flocking to Trump. You don't see you see the major economists out there talking about what I have been able to do. I don't hear anybody talking about his economic plan likely to bring America around and keep America first. And by the way, here's Trump talking about all that he's done and Trump and his debate night. He's a pathological liar. He lied about Roe. He refused to accept the outcome of the election. He refused to condemn January 6th. And he says, they claim, he spoke with Putin before he invaded. What the hell are we doing, Joe? What are we doing? This is bizarre. The American public is not going to move away from me as an average voter. And again, I'm here for two reasons, pal. One, to rebuild the economy for hardworking middle-class people, give everybody a shot. Just a straight shot. Everybody gets a fair chance, number one. Number two, remember all this talk about how I don't have the black support? Come on, give me a break. Come with me. Watch. I'm getting so frustrated by the elites. Now, I'm not talking about you guys, but about the elites in the party who they know so much more. But if any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me at the convention.
I mean, when is the last time that you heard a Democratic Party leader railing against the Democratic Party elite and setting them as a faction that is contrary to the will of the ordinary voter? Of course, that's true. But no Democratic Party official would ever dare say such a thing, that the Democratic Party elite, the people who finance and run the Democratic Party, have interests completely separate than the ordinary Democratic voter, even though that's, of course, true. And so we are in an extremely strange situation when Joe Biden goes on to Morning Joe and starts ranting and raving against the corruption and the evils of the elite financiers and media allies who have long been unified with him, and starts ranting and raving against them because they're trying to drive him from the race. And at the same time, he kind of challenges them and defies them and says, if you want to get me out of the race, come try and beat me at the convention. Challenge me at the convention. Come beat me there. So I think what you can see from all of this is that this is a person, Joe Biden, who, whatever else is true about his brain, he does have clarity about the fact that he wants to continue to be the president. He wants to continue to be the nominee. He has no intention of withdrawing. I think on top of all the other things I've said about why that is, about why he has no intention of withdrawing, just in general, again, I think most people have that experience that nobody who gets older wants to start acknowledging that they're incapable as a result of their aging. People start finding all kinds of ways to deny this. I remember the first time I ever had to start using reading glasses in my life, I didn't think, it's because I'm getting older and my eyes are more strained and less capable than they were when I was 25. I started telling everybody that the print these days is so small, and how can this be? And then I used to remember my grandmother in her old age complaining about how the print on all sorts of bottles were so small that nobody could ever read it, and I quickly realized what I was doing. This is normal. This is a kind of thing that you want to resist, but it's even more serious when you're being told that you have cognitive impairment, that you're no longer fit to do the job that you've been doing your whole life. No person wants to admit that. It's very, very difficult to see Joe Biden admitting, look, I'm at the end of my life. I'm going to now give in and capitulate to the people who I've been saying are acting improperly. I'm going to admit that I have cognitive impairment, and as a result, I'm going to relinquish the Democratic Party nomination that voters have given me and spend the rest of my life just sort of purposeless and out of the public spotlight, accepting that I'm now cognitively declining and dying. That is not something that any human being can easily do psychologically, and I think in the case of Joe Biden in particular, who has spent his entire life in Washington, it's very, very difficult to perceive that. And so what you're really seeing now is, in fact, what Biden described, which is a war between the expressed views of the Democratic Party base through what was by no means a fair election. They shut down the primaries. They allowed no debates. They announced in advance Biden was their nominee, but they at least nominally had a primary process, and tens of millions of Democratic voters did, in fact, vote for Biden. And polls always showed that he had a big lead on all other opponents, including RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson. So I think it is fair to say that that was the choice of the Democratic Party voters to lead the nomination. And unless Biden voluntarily decides to step down, the only way that these elites who think they control the party and should have everything done the way they want can force him out of the race is by basically using methods of a coup, by just strangling him and encircling him with all kinds of threats about the abandonment of donors, about the way that the media will attack him and attack his legacy. It really is an operation by liberal elites to drive the sitting president out of the race that he was chosen by Democratic voters to be in. And in this, you can really see the extreme contempt that liberal elites have for actual values of democracy, even as they spend their lives lecturing everybody on how the only way to save democracy is by keeping them empowered. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.